How many kinds of white people are in Sweden? Because the answer is not one, and that is weird. I'm Charlie. I'm an 8th grade science teacher, and I have a master's degree in bioethics for some reason. And I want to smash together two ideas that are gonna be kind of weird, but you're gonna get there by the end. I just got finished reading Stolen by Ann-Helene Lestadius, and it is about the Sámi people in Sweden, who are the whitest indigenous people I have ever seen. Maybe that strikes you as a weird claim, but like, look at this. There's no melanin in these people, and yet they are not white. And maybe you don't know this, but again, 8th grade science teacher, all the melanin is concentrated in the plus 30 to minus 30 latitude region because, as I have been repeatedly explaining to my students, the Earth is tilted at 27.5 degrees as it orbits around the sun. So that region is constantly exposed to the sun, and the northern and southern regions are less exposed to the sun. So we have evolved to have less melanin so that we can create more vitamin D when we are further north and get exposure to less sunlight. So the Sámi people, the subject of this book, live so far up north that they are an indigenous people, but they have white complexions. And indeed, the author of the book is herself a white indigenous person. That's a weird category, and here's where we're going to start smashing together ideas. White indigeneity, a word I don't know how to say, but want to learn to say because of Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, is a limiting case argument in the social construction of race. That was a complicated sentence, but let's break it down. The social construction of race is something I've covered at length on this channel, specifically with reference to Dorothy Roberts and Ruha Benjamin, two scholars who have written about this at length. In a nutshell, though, the concept of social construction of race means that there isn't anything biologically real, biologically determinative about race in the way that we think as a society, and in reality, it is our social categories that create the concepts of race as we know them. One example that you are probably familiar with is the maternal mortality gap, the tendency for Black mothers to die more frequently in childbirth. This is not something that comes about as a result of genetics. It's something that comes about as a result of the racism of doctors, something that has been well documented in Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington and all the other books that I've cited so far. Another example, asthma rates have a tendency to follow highways. Highways have a tendency to follow low-income neighborhoods, which as a result of our history, the other book that I want to gesture with is in my classroom. We bulldoze a Black neighborhood, we put a highway through it, asthma rates go up as a result. So there's nothing intrinsically about being 30 degrees, where did we go? There's nothing intrinsic about being above 30 degrees north or below 30 degrees north that leads to a racial difference in rates of asthma. But if you as a person are exposed to more highways, then you're going to see an increase in asthma. Another example, which I talked about at length again, is the birth weights of babies post 9/11 in America. We were able to see that Arab babies were born at lower birth weights as a result of maternal stress on the fetus because of racism happening in the United States. Dorothy Roberts covers that in a lot of cases, in a lot of detail in her book Fatal Invention. These are three examples of how racism shows up in biology and not the other way around. It is society that creates biological differences, reifies biological differences, not biological differences that lead to the differences in outcomes in society. This is one of the central tenets of the book Stolen, and let's break it down as to why it is such an interesting limiting case argument. I'm not Sámi myself, and my roots are not anywhere close to that area. So if the Sámi people would object to me characterizing them as not white, I hope that you would give me a little bit of pedagogical license as I try to explain this concept. One of the particularly gutting scenes in this book is when the main character needs to check her grandmother into a nursing home. And the grandmother, is having traumatic flashbacks to when she was in a indigenous re-education school. If you're unfamiliar, we're as a society coming to terms with the fact that when the United States took over the indigenous land to create our country, we didn't just create a country by force. We did a cultural genocide in addition to a physical genocide. We separated people from their families and put a lot of children into re-education schools. I'm trying to learn more about these myself, but it's one of the things that gets depicted in the background of this book. The reason I bring this up is the Sámi people throughout this text go through case after case after case of physical and cultural discrimination, having the violence against their people completely ignored by the ruling powers. They qualify, and the number of parallels to American indigeneity are astonishing. I was reading this, and the stories are based on real things that happened in the real world. I was struck by how the same horrifying things that we did to the indigenous people of America were done to the indigenous people of Sweden. The reason that I'm interested in the concept of the social construction of race is because of people like Trump saying that DEI is bad and that DEI is to blame for things like increasing plane crashes, like the claim. And I can't pull the quote because I got to write my lessons for tomorrow, and just the Trump said that the plane crashes were due to DEI, and his reasoning for this when pressed by reporters was common sense. To me, when you are saying that, you are invoking the opposite of the social construction of race. You are invoking biological determinism, and not just biological determinism, white supremacist biological determinism. Let me write that down. That was a lot of syllables. White supremacist biological determinism is the opposite of the social construction of race, where the social construction theory says that the differences that we see in the world, incarceration rates being one of them, poverty rates being another one of them, are due to society. White supremacist biological determinism says that the differences that we see in society are due to something intrinsic about race. And there's a lot of different dog whistles that people talk about this. They use the word savage like they do in discussing stolen and in our history of eugenics in this country. And people invoke this when they say things like common sense, DEI is a problem, etc., etc. And the phrase that gets tossed around is America is for Americans. What the hell does that mean if not even a dog whistle, just like a thinly veiled white supremacist biological deterministic statement in which you make the claim that it's like I'm saying white supremacy. Literally, I don't want to. That's like the definition of what white supremacism means in the terms of the literal words themselves. One race is superior to another. And that cannot be reasonable when you look at limiting case arguments, because limiting case arguments bolster social construction theory and make the case that if you can have white skin and yet not be white, like the Sámi people are experiencing indigeneity but maintaining white complexions, then whiteness is more than a biological trait. QED, quote erat demonstrandum. Let me wrap this up. Okay, I paused and listened back to everything that I said so far. I skipped a couple of logical steps in my jump from dog whistles to white supremacy. And rather than try to piece those out all in a hair-splitty way, I'd rather just argue this. One of the bonkers talking points that you will run across when you're running through the internet streets listening to people spout nonsense with big podcast microphones and no credentials is that Irish people used to not be white. And I'm not a historian, but as I understand it, this was true because Irish people were immigrants at a certain point in American history when the population of the colonizing Americans was white, but Irish people were seen as the lower class, second class citizens. And so you have not just the Sámi people being white but not white, you have the Irish people being white but not white. A fact that is often used as a point of I'm not racist because I'm Irish or something, just like whatever nonsensical leap people feel like making in these internet streets. The internet is meant to give you satisfying, concluding moments in videos so that you feel a sense of satisfaction. I want to deprive you of that deliberately, because if skin color is not the thing that defines whiteness, if DNA doesn't, if country of origin, geographic place doesn't define what whiteness is, what is the thing that is the definition of this thing we call our race? Perhaps, as I keep telling my 8th graders, the answer is not for me to tell you, but for you to do your freaking homework yourself. I'm Charlie. This is That Makes Sense to Me. Patreon remains the best way to support my ongoing work. Half that money just goes to me buying snacks for my kids in class anyway. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.